Next guest, Christophe.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for
Hi.
having me.
How are you?
Fine, and yourself?
Good, thank you. Good. So I was happy I didn't have to ask myself too many questions at the end of that presentation, but there we go. So you're going to be speaking to us today about API Design Linter, right? And how this relates to API products. You're looking good. I'll let you continue. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So, hi, everybody. My name is Christophe Guilmart. I work as an architect, API designer, and technical product owner at AXA. This is what Alan called an API product manager. Today, I want to talk about something which is dear to me, API Design Linter. I normally start with an introduction about the motivation behind using a linter to help you promote API linting in your own team. But today we only have 20 minutes, so we will go a bit faster, fast forward the why to focus more on the how, and hopefully keep some minutes to look at some advanced techniques. So API as a product is a very broad topic. Today I want to focus on four aspects: the documentation quality, the developer UX, meaning the look and feel, the style, and so on. A little bit about security, but mostly about industrialization. Before going further, let's talk about standards. Standards are usually not very popular amongst doers, but standards is the foundation of industrialization. It allows us to be better, go faster, and become stronger. We have a love-hate relationship with standard. We like standard when we use something, but we don't like them when we build something. But remember, someone will use what you build. So I'll let you take a moment to think about that one. And let's look at some anecdotes. So shipping container, a classic example of standard success story. A single box which can go on boats, trains, and truck traveling all around the world. It is easy to make an analogy with HTTP. Another example I like a lot are the screws. Nowadays, we see screws as a commodity. It is easy to get a compatible screw in any shop. Without going into details on this part of our history, before the Industrial Revolution and for a few decades after, each manufacturer had different screws. In that, the tolerances were poor, meaning not every screw will fit into a given threaded hole. You often have to try a few screws before finding one which will fit, even if you have a good one. It took decades to align the industry on the thread angle alone. So was 50 better than 60 degree? Well, and the screw head is still debated today. Obviously, it would have been much cheaper to align manufacturer before investing in manufacturing machines. Amongst other things, the success of Ford come from quality, standardized screw. So, industrialization requires standards, but standards is not an objective per se. It is a mean to quickly deliver reliable business value. If you don't use standard, you are not doing industrial production. You are doing artisanal handcraft. You are an artist creating unique piece of art every time. Foremost, industrialization enable API landscape management, which is another topic. But what about standard for APIs? So API standard, you have the format, you have the design itself, and you have the tools you can use. So let's look first at the format. The most popular format for API specification is Open API Specification, formerly known as Swagger. As a reminder, this is a text file describing the API design, and this is a file we want to run the linter on. But a format is just a medium, a container. The design of your API product must be consistent. Your API are part of an API landscape. Your consumer and client expect a consistent look and feel and nomenclature. Always use existing RFC and ISO when possible. I don't have time to go over RFC and ISO today, but really, zero excuses. Use them and use them as intended. But what about the actual design? Some RFC are old and sometimes difficult to use in modern context. In particular, HTTP status code usage is often debated. Last but not least, a good documentation is key. Having a standard API design allows developer to work on the business value instead of dealing with, well, screw size. So, an API design linter will help you to enforce API standards in your APIs. Well, we are 5 minutes in. Time to check who is still awake with a quick test. I can't see the chat, so won't be interactive, sorry, but just try to find the problem here. There is one problem on this one. Can you see it? The example house should be all caps. This one was easy, just to warm up. Another one. Here we have 8 lines and 5 problems. Can you spot them all? The first one, my grandma will have spotted right away. So the description should start with an uppercase. Is it bad? Will it break your API? No, it's not a big deal, but it makes you look unprofessional, and it's very easy to fix. Here again, the example is incorrect. It should be 12.3, not 12.3. This is a problem you often see in Europe. Another example is hero. It's not a valid ISO code. The example value is incorrect. Same as max length. Max length should be 3, not 10, because this ISO code only use 3 characters. And the last one is the only one that is more tricky because linter cannot catch this kind of problem. You should definitely not use floats for quantity of money. Integer is much better. And that's really the only one on a human need to spot. All the other ones, the linter can catch them in less than a second. Of course, this test was way too easy because in a pull request, you will have to read the YAML file. So why using a linter? Basically, it will enforce your standard. It is reliable and fair. It is very cheap, both to run and integrate, and it detects problem early. And as you know, the earlier you catch a problem, the cheaper it is to fix it. And it's quite flexible. You can run it in a pipeline or you can run it on demand. Which brings me to Spectral. Spectral is one of the most popular API linter today. You can install Spectral command line interface and run it locally, or you can integrate it into your pipeline. So it's demo time. To run Spectral, you call Spectral, you tell him I want to lint, the file you want to lint, and you say you need to specify a rule set. So here I use this one. He will detect you, he will pass your file, and he will tell you for each problem he found the name of the rule, the line number, the error message, and the JSON path. Notice that as most linter, it will give you a return value 0 because there is no error. But if you use another rule set, one and return error, then the exit will be 1. So you can test that if you use some kind of bash. So how could you integrate that into a pipeline? So let me take an example here. Okay, so here I'm using Node tech stack, but work very similarly in other contexts. Here in the package, you will add a script to call the Spectral, very much a command line I just showed you. Don't forget to include it in your lint step. Add the dependencies on Spectral and the dependencies on your collection of custom rules. And you will also need a rule set for this project. So I will go back to that later. So what about the rule set? So the rule set will look something like that. So this is the simplest rule set you can have. This is just basically saying import all the rules which are built in into Spectral. With those 2 lines, you're good to go. After, you can change the severity of some rules, or you can add your own rules. You can even add exception. I'll go back to that later. I like to organize my rules in 3 categories: the one from Spectral, the one that are very technical, and the one which are a matter of style and will often not be aligned with some legacy project. And then I got a dedicated rule set for each kind of topic. So for example, here's a case. That's the rule we saw before. This is a custom rules. You will say for a given field, this is a JSON path, in this case description, I want the value of description to not match this pattern. And that's it. That's a custom rule. Another example will be here. You will say for each parameter which is in the query, I want the casing to be snake. Once again, this is a Spectral core function, meaning this function here is part of Spectral. Didn't need to write anything else than what you see on screen. In a similar fashion, I also have a block list. So each property name, so the property itself, cannot be any of those names. Here, I probably could have get away with a core function, but I wrote a custom function. So the custom function is one I wrote myself, which is imported here. You can find in this folder. Custom functions are in JavaScript. They're very easy to write. They take 3 parameters: the value you're actually testing, the option of the rule, which is what you specified in the rule set, the list of disallowed word in this case, and the path inside the Swagger. Those lines are just to check that the rules options are set properly, and this is where the magic happens. You test the value against the block list. If you find it in the block list, you create an error object. If not, you return undefined. And that's it. 5 lines. And this custom function can be reused for other purposes. For example, here I'm testing the format, and I say I don't want ever a format to be called datetime because I consider it to be a typo of datetime with dash. Another rule I like a lot, that's not this one here, is this one. As I mentioned before, there is not strong consensus nowadays on usage of verbs and HTTP status, so it's a good thing to have that in a linter. This rule will basically tell you only those verbs are allowed and only those HTTP status are allowed. And for each HTTP status, you can specify which verb you accept. I mentioned before security. So linter can help you with security, but it's, for example, by checking the schema you use. So you say if you have a schema, it must be OAuth. Another thing you can check is the nomenclature of your scope. So you can say for each get which actually has security, the scope must finish by read-only. And if it's a post, it can be write or read-only. And if it's a delete, it must be write. Notice I still use Spectral 5.9. Spectral 6 got some little differences, but work pretty much the same overall. One thing you will want to know also is how can you use shared across your company custom rule sets in different projects. So typically what you will do is, as I mentioned before, include it one way or the other as a package, for example, and then you will need a custom rule set for your own project. You will include some of the rule set, all of them, going to look for them in my case in the node modules. And then you can add exceptions. So if you have some path which doesn't work for a given rule, you can just say for this path, don't apply this rule. Watch out you escape properly the path, can be a little bit tricky, but it's documented, but just watch out with that one. Another thing is writing custom rule can be a little bit difficult because when it crashes, it just crash and you cannot debug that. So what I did is I had a runner which tests each rule set against a dedicated Swagger which I use for developing the rule, very much like a unit testing approach. So here I will test only this rule and only this Swagger. And for example, here I would say that this path has 3 parameters, while I expect only 2. And this is here I have the list of rule sets, and for each rule set, I have a file with the same name which tests this rule set. Okay, so I'm going, yeah, I got still a little bit of time. So I will show you another one which is interesting. It is the response one here. So you can write a lot of rules, which are very interesting, without the need for custom functions. For example, this one here, say, if you actually declare some kind of security, you must declare a response for 1. And the same here for 403. This one here is a regex. Retrospectively, I will probably, oh, sorry, JSON path. Retrospectively, I will probably have wrote a custom function. But what it does here is say, if you have an ID in the path and you don't return 202, then you synchronous and you should have a 404 response declared. What else? Yeah. Okay, that's pretty much all the rules I wanted to show you. There is one also very much like the other one, but a little bit different, is this one here. This one is very much like the block list, but more complex because it tests ISO code. So I actually decide to embed the ISO code inside the rule for diverse reasons. And what I will do here is first build some different names for the ISO code. And I will look in the description and in the format if the ISO code is mentioned. And then if it's mentioned either in the description or in the format and the field is a string, so it's a property of type string, then I will test the example and the enum. So this rule, for example, may return more than 1 error for the same field. It's important to have a unique object because Spectral will filter out duplicated. So make sure you have paths which are correct and error message which are not generic. And let's go back to the slides. Okay, so what can you do today? Okay, because we saw a lot of very interesting talk in API days, but I really want to call on you to actually do something about that today. So the very first thing is to publish an AOS file or Swagger file. I assume most of you already published an OS file for your public or external API, but what about internal API? Did you publish one? Another thing is run an API linter, at very least once, locally. You may find things that are easy to fix, you know, and not all fixes are breaking change. So just do it, take 10 minutes. Ideally, add the API linter in your pipelines. It's just not based. It's very easy to integrate whatever technology you're using. And the same as you write new tests when you spot new bugs, write new rules when you spot a new API design issue. So writing custom rules, especially for some special use cases, may be a little bit time consuming, and you may benefit from inspiration you may find on the internet. So I don't have yet the AXA rule set open source, but IBM and Postman does have a collection of custom rules. You can have a look for inspiration purposes. I put you here the URL and the QR, so you can have a look at it. As a conclusion, treat your API as cattle, not as pets. To become a tech-driven company, you need to manage API as an asset with an industrial mindset. This means automation and industrialization for the API design as well. And I'm on time. I don't know if there is any questions.
Hey, Christophe, thanks. Interesting presentation. So just kind of a couple of questions from my side before we go into the other questions is, I mean, this spectral of linter, etc., is it, tied to any technology, or can I use it with like, any API gateway? Is it completely open?
That is a very good question. I forgot to mention. Because you actually testing the specification of your API, the open API specification file, the Swagger, it is completely agnostic to anything except to have a Swagger. So if whatever tech stack you use at some point in your pipeline, you have a Swagger, you can do this.
Okay, so can I like
And
put it in
it work on Node, by the way. Spectral use Node, so it's everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah. And so can I put that like in my CI/CD pipeline that it runs and it checks the API specs and okay, well that sounds pretty good. And who would you see like creating these linter files? Would it be the API spec manager?
That is very much depending on your org, really. But it can be the API designer if you have an API designer team, which is not very common. It can be your architecture board, or you can just use some which you like. The same as you use linter for JavaScript or for Java from big name companies because they're ready, they're here, and you like them. You can just grab the one from IBM or Postman and just say, is it good enough for me?
Okay.
It's also matter a little bit of your style. If you already have API, you will typically do the other way around. You will say, I want to maintain constant style with what I already have for new projects. So you will build the rule based on what you have. Also, if you have guidelines internally, there's one thing I really insist about this. Most developers don't want to read 70 plus page documents.
It's
They
true.
just don't. They don't have time. They don't want to, and they sometimes don't even know where they are. But if you give them a tool, which you say, hey, it's work with Node. Node, right? You just have to install it, and it's a command line, and that's it. And it will just tell you where the problem is. Very few people will tell you they don't want to do it because if it's easy and cheap and free, why wouldn't you want to do it?
Yeah, and developers not reading documentation is classic good thing. Hey, we did have one question in the chat. Let me grab that now. It's from Maria, and she says, "Do you have API style guides which provide the guidelines for the API designer to specify some of the practices and enforce with linter?"
Yeah, we do. We have some in the group. And we have some per project because for whatever reason they may not always align. But the idea of the linter is that it's a tool to help you enforce and check the compliance with the guidelines automatically. Of course, the linter, as I mentioned in my presentation, will not catch all the problems, especially around semantic name of URL, path, and so on. But regarding casing and usage of verbs, linter is a very, very good tool. Notice you can go pretty far with the custom rules. I saw, for example, a project which had a rule to check that the URL was actually belonging to them, the base URL. And that's, of course, a rule you will only use in this project, but you can go pretty far.
All right, sounds pretty good. And we have another quick question from Mehdi, which is, knowing that Stripe is worth is at 105 billion, wow, with 8 API products, right? Okay, with hundreds of versions, but 8 API products. Do you think they treat them as pets or cattle?
That will depend your definition, I assume. But what this sentence come from? It's kind of a joke, actually. It comes from the saying we had maybe a few decades ago about servers. I got enough white hair to remember deploying server on actual machine with on proper hosting, self-host, and
I definitely
now
remember that. have enough.
And now everybody deploy Docker container, you know, and that's kind of the spirit here. You want to have a uniform as much as possible. You want to have a single dashboard with all your metrics. You want to have the same metrics everywhere, and you want to have the same API design everywhere. And as much as possible, you want to use the same rules. I don't know the API of strips, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure they're not completely different one from the other.
All right, Christophe, that's about all we've got time for. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks to you.